While the property market has seen healthy activity throughout 2022, recent reports have shown that Malaysians are now more careful when making big purchasing decisions. Inflation issues and higher borrowing costs have tightened potential buyers' budgets, simultaneously forcing sellers to raise their prices to cover the higher cost of property investments. For the property market, will it remain active with positive growth in 2023? I'm Azaria Tagaya, and this is Money Matters. Good evening and welcome to Money Matters. This week, the Real Estate and Housing Developers Association joins us. Its president, Datuk NK Tong, is with me in the studio right now. Hello, Datuk. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
Good. Thank you, Azaria. And feel free to call me NK.
NK. All right. I will then. All right, NK. So we're going to dive into this topic, the property market, by first starting off on what are the current trends among consumers right now. For instance, I know that a lot of property buyers are now looking at buying property outside of the Klang Valley due to larger and more affordable homes, more space, more land space and stuff like that. So based on this, is this really the trend that we're looking at right now? What is the current appetite of home buyers, so to speak?
Now, that's a good question to start off, and I think we have to look at it in the framework or background of the last couple of years. And it's not just a Klang Valley phenomenon. I think it's a global phenomenon. Post-lockdown or during lockdown, a lot of interest has been in landed properties, maybe outside the city centre. For a couple of months or years, people couldn't actually get out to look at the outdoors. So a lot of people do enjoy having landed property. Yeah. I think moving forward, we'll go back to a more normal market where people are interested in both landed as well as strata properties. Of course, as we go further from the city centre, things get a little bit more affordable. Yeah. But again, there are benefits for being close to the centres of commerce and activity.
Yeah. There are. Yeah. Now, we're talking about consumers and their appetites right now. We also want to find out about, looking at the current condition of consumers or the current situation, so to speak, with people's incomes that are not that high, to put it mildly, and also with their salaries that some have been stagnant with no real significant increase over the past few years. So with this situation, a lot of people are faced with high levels of debt at the same time. So when we're looking at this, undoubtedly there's been a need for developers to actually raise their prices in order to adjust with this situation. So what are your views on this, and what kind of position does this actually put developers in? Well, I think coming back to the last 2-3 years during pandemic, things have not been stable. So Malaysia had the goal of being a high-income nation. I think previous governments have attempted to do that. I think the messaging from the new government is on the right track. And as we are able to increase incomes, I think it'll be easier for people to afford real estate. As far as developers are concerned, we are grappling with the rising costs. I think we're doing our best to make sure that we can make properties affordable for the rakyat. After all, if they're not affordable, then we don't have a business. Yeah. But it is challenging. Yeah. So it's a fine balance moving forward. I think what's also important is consumer sentiment. And I was in Singapore 3 weeks ago, and everyone's asking me, how's the new government? And I turned around to them and said, how is our new government? And I think the message is that we are on the right track. So I think that type of positive sentiment will then actually spur the whole economy, the property industry, and then the home buying public. Yeah. All right. Well, talking about the new government, some of the items in Budget 2023, REHDA's memorandum for Budget 2023, include the rising prices of material for building costs. Now, what are some of the other issues that you addressed in the memorandum, and have these issues actually been addressed in Budget 2023?
Yeah. Okay, let's just say all industries would want to put their wish list in, but I think it is challenging for the government to balance all the factors. Rising costs, we brought it up to highlight this current situation. I don't think we expect any drastic moves, but at least to
keep it an open and fair competition to encourage a free flow of pricing and goods. We did ask for the government to reconsider the home ownership campaign. This will be 3.0 because we've had two versions of it. I think the government has kept the previous announced budget from October last year, which is stamp duty waivers for properties below $500,000, and then a discount for those between $500,000 and $1 million. I think that's a good targeted approach. But moving forward, I continue to encourage the government to look at the possibility of reintroducing the home ownership campaign, because it really did help the rakyat in terms of both the affordability as well as the sentiment. You know, with that type of incentive in place, they felt more confident that there was a movement forward. But I do understand the government has a limited budget. It was an expansionary budget. It was a record-breaking budget. If I could just comment, some people might say, oh, maybe irresponsible, but I think otherwise. I think if you look at what Dr. Sri Anwar said in framing the budget, there were headwinds that they saw globally. And I think it's important for our government to have the bullets to prepare against any challenges. However, if the world economy turns out better than we expected, a budget is just a budget. They don't have to spend it. But at least we are prepared and resilient for anything that comes against us.
Indeed. Now, we want to talk a little bit more about the rising prices of material costs. Now, you're a developer yourself.
Yeah.
So from a more focused standpoint, from your own standpoint, what kind of position does this really put developers in at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, it is a little bit uncertain, because then as we prepare to launch a project, and typically a project can take up to 3 years or more, then we have to figure out where are costs going between now and then, right? I mean, it's one thing to say, yeah, I can lock in my costs with our contractors, but if prices go up like they have in the past 2-3 years, the contractors may have to come back to the table and say, look, we need to sit down and talk about this. Of course, also with the labour issue, I mean, we're resolving that. I think the government's doing as best it can.
Yes.
But it's still a logistic exercise to bring them in. And it's also an issue to train them, because these are, you know, the ones we have trained have left the country. It's like brain drain, and we're getting a new batch. So I think some of these issues are at the back of our developers' minds, how they can continue to take a more proactive stance moving forward.
All right, fantastic. Now, more on consumers after this, Dato'. We want to talk about the My First Home scheme, which is ended, and also on the back of that, we have the scheme Jaminan Kredit Perumahan, Home Guarantee Credit Scheme, which is another option for consumers. More on that after we return from the break with Datuk NK Tong from REHDA. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. This week on Money Matters, we're joined by the Real Estate and Housing Developers Association, REHDA Malaysia. Its president, Datuk NK Tong, is with us. Hi, NK. Now, before the break, we talked about consumer sentiment and how the current appetite of home buyers is. We also want to talk about the My First Home scheme, which is ended on April 1st. It was introduced in 2011, so that's quite a long time. But on the back of that, we also have the Housing Credit Guarantee Scheme, which is offering 5 billion from the government in terms of injections for loans, for financing for consumers. But the question is, will this allocation be enough to actually fulfill the needs of the target market of the My First Home scheme?
Yeah, so I think, come back to our comments about the budget earlier. Everyone wants everything all the time.
Yeah.
The government has a limited budget, so they are very targeted in their approach. I think that's a good thing. I don't think one scheme replaces the other, because the previous one was for first-time home buyers. This current one is for buyers who may have the qualifying income, but not necessarily a fixed income. And sometimes banks...
Gig workers,
right,
for instance.
Right,
Yeah.
farmers, gig workers. So the government is trying to address that market. Some of the members who would have benefited from this first scheme may be left out of this second scheme. So we'll have to see how it goes. I totally understand the government's budgetary constraints, although I would continue to keep an eye on this My First Home scheme, people who are left out, and see if we need to address that. For example, I think we find that a lot of those who are buying affordable homes, your Rumah Selangorku, for example, they struggle to come up with the initial deposit. And, for that type of home, it's very good value, it's very well priced. It's not really a credit risk for anyone lending, so the guarantee does come in very handy.
All right. So on the back of that, what would you propose be, aside from the scheme Jaminan Kredit Perumahan, what would be other measures that could help Malaysians afford to buy homes and also guarantee their quality of life, basically? Yeah,
I think the goal of the government to have targeted approaches to help certain segments of the rakyat that need it is the right approach. Maybe continue to monitor the success of this scheme, but also if they can look at whether that the previous scheme that was called off, whether that is going to affect some of the first-time home buyers in the affordable category.
I see. Okay. Now, we want to talk a little bit about infrastructure projects around housing development projects. So this would be good for housing projects around those infrastructure projects. For instance, MRT3. How do you see this benefiting the housing development industry in terms of this multiplier effect, so to speak?
It's like fax machines. The first two fax machines that existed had very little value. Yeah. So I'm showing my age here. But as the network effect increases, it becomes more valuable. I think it's the same with public transport, especially MRT, LRT, transit schemes. And so as we continue to evolve and have more and more stations and more networks, I think the value of the real estate will continue to improve. It may not happen overnight. You might see a spike initially, and then as more and more people continue to appreciate the functionality of these LRT, MRT projects, then it becomes more valuable. Not many people are taking it right now, right? So, I mean, just as an example, I do take it when I need to get from the city centre to say here in Sri Pentas, because you have the Wan Utama station. Yeah,
to avoid the jam, basically.
Avoid the jam, right? But the other thing, if you look at it from a historical perspective, the world's oldest underground is London. This year, it's 160 years old. We are like, I don't know, 30, maybe 30 plus years. So we have a long way to go. But as we continue to build that network, I think it'll become more and more valuable. Therefore, real estate also will improve and become more valuable, even as traffic increases, especially.
Indeed, indeed, Dato. All right. We also want to touch a little bit on problematic housing projects. So when we're talking about this, we have actually a few things that we're looking at. We have sick housing projects, those that have been in construction but uncompleted. And we also have property overhang, which involves properties that have been completed but are unsold. Now, talking about this, now the government has expressed expressed concern about the number of problematic housing projects, with the Local Government Development Deputy Minister mentioning that he expects the number of sick, delayed and abandoned projects to increase further, and this is due to extensions that were granted actually during the pandemic.
Yes.
So he also said that the task force would look into measures at improving this, and they just announced a 25 million ringgit injection to actually revive abandoned housing projects. Now, what are your thoughts on this, Dato'?
Yeah, this is an area of importance for the housing industry to focus on. So we have sick in order of severity. So we have delayed, then we have sick, then we have abandoned, right? I think the government is tackling this in a very proactive manner. They're not waiting for things to happen. They are going out there. YB Akmal, the Deputy Minister, has been tasked to head this task force, and they're drilling down into numbers, which is good. We need data as an industry and also for the ministry. I would say, again, coming back to the past 3 years of the pandemic, that has created a disruption in the smooth flowing of the market. So it's hard to say whether this is symptomatic of the industry in a business as usual mode. Yeah. I think it's more the last 3 years have caused this disruption. Mm-hmm. How we recover from it is also something we have to watch very closely. So yes. I'm very heartened that the government is grabbing this by the horns, putting in some funds to actually revive a few projects. And then from there, we can see whether this is effective and how can we modify the scheme.
All right, speaking about how we can modify it, Dato', the YB has actually mentioned that there are more than 1,000 of these projects nationwide. And the task force, aside from thinking of ways to revive these abandoned projects, they're also looking at suggestions from REHDA and also REHDA Institute. So what are REHDA's views on this? What are some of the suggestions that you can offer?
Right, so we have, I think we need to look at it in two buckets, right? One is how do we deal with the existing projects that you mentioned? Okay. And the other one is how can we create an environment that, moving forward, that doesn't allow for such things to happen. I think for the current projects that are caught, again, we're trapped with this 3-year anomaly, right? Nobody ever thought that workers were not allowed to go out and work, that a lot of workers left the country and we couldn't finish. So it's no wonder you get the delayed, sick and abandoned projects. How we deal with that, I think we need to get the feedback from the ministry in terms of data, what level of severity these projects are, how can developers come in to help. I mean, that's one thing. I think the one moving forward is how can we continue to ensure the industry functions in a very effective manner so that there will be less opportunities for this type of disruptions.
All right, so looking at the property market, REHDA recently did a survey to look at the sentiments among developers at the moment. We'll be talking about that survey after this. Money Matters will be taking another short break. Don't go anywhere. Thanks for staying with us on Money Matters. Datuk NK Tong of REHDA Malaysia is with us this week. Datuk NK, now, before the break, we talked a little bit about SIG housing projects and some of the comments from YB Akmal. We want to take a step back and take another look at YB Akmal's comments that he said another challenge faced by the industry was that buyers were not in the mood to invest in property due to uncertainty in the economic climate. So what is REHDA's view of the market at the moment, especially with the new government in place?
I think sentiment can change over time. With the new government in place, developers are very optimistic that things are moving in the right direction. For the rakyat, a lot of these targeted subsidies and schemes are helping the economy as well as the ones who need it. And I think if the rakyat does well, prospers, the industry will do well, so will the country.
I see. All right. Now, we want to talk a little bit about the survey that you done, you released earlier. So a recent study by REHDA found that property developers, 51% actually of property developers, were not looking to launch projects in the first half of 2023. So what do you think is behind those sentiments? And also, what are the prospective outlooks for the second half of the year then?
So that survey came out, was conducted in January, it was published in February. It's more of a sentiment survey. I think about 10% of our 1,500 members took part in it. I would say it's more of a sentiment survey. And the question was asked, and about 51% said they weren't going to launch. And one of the reasons was unfavorable market conditions. I think that was a combination of the concern for rising costs and where they would land in the next, as I mentioned earlier, 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
The other one was the new government. And in January, it was quite new. But I think the feedback I've been getting from members over the last 2 months that the new government is what they see very positive things. And they also see it from the feedback of consumers coming to the showrooms.
Sorry, Dato', what kind of unfavorable market conditions are we looking at the moment?
Concerns about rising costs and the stability of government, right? And the direction of the government. I think those two issues with the government have been put to rest. I think Dr. Sri Anwar, YB Nga at the Ministry of Housing, they've been taking a very proactive approach to making sure the industry is sustainable. Looking out into the second half of the year, the survey also showed much higher optimism than the first half.
I see. Yeah. Okay, so what are some of the prospective outlooks for the second half of the year that you're seeing in terms of your members at the moment?
I think, the other unfavorable condition was China reopening, and then there's this thought about, oh no, not another MCO, what is it, 4.0 or whatever, or another virus, but that has actually not come to pass. So the next 6 months, we are more optimistic that the economy will continue to grow, and therefore, I think the property industry as well.
All right, fantastic. Now, the government has also announced plans to reduce the time needed for local authorities to grant development approvals. So how much will this actually impact developers?
It's intangible, but it will be a huge impact. I think the concern for a lot of developers is uncertainty. If you can remove uncertainty, we can, and also, so it's tangible and intangible, because with a shortened approval process, we are less subjected to rising costs, rising inflation. We are able to pass that savings onto the rakyat. And in terms of uncertainty being removed, it will be easier for us to do the projects. And as an example, just this week, REHDA KL had a dialogue session with DBKL, led by Dato' Sri Mahadi, the mayor. And he was very vocal to his 40 officers and to the REHDA members there. And he said, look, what time do we stay up till to get these approvals done? And 10 o'clock? And someone said, no, we sometimes go to midnight. So this local authority is leading the way. Just so happens it's also the federal government. But they're leading the way to make sure that there's no impediments for developers. But again, this shortening of approval process impacts and reduces costs to the rakyat and home ownership. So I'm very encouraged by that.
So will this actually be the way forward in ensuring that Malaysians will have more affordable housing options in the future?
Yes, definitely. And if I could just sort of segue, I mean, showing our age, or my age here, 20, 30 years ago, if you had to apply for an IC or a passport, it would take weeks. And today we can get in hours. So to say that an approval process cannot be reduced from many, many months to a minimum, I think Dr. Sri Anwar at our 50th anniversary dinner said to 3 months. And he was very emphatic about that he wants all local authorities to toe the line.
I see. Well, it has been wonderful speaking to you for the past half hour, Datuk, but unfortunately that's all the time we have for Money Matters this week. Thank you so much for joining us and making time.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Well, that's all the time we have for today. We'd like to thank once again our guest, Datuk NK Tong of REHDA, for joining us on this episode. Now, do join us again next week, same day, same time, for more money insights that matter. I'm Azaria Tagaya. Take care and have a great weekend.